Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here today. I was amazed at how such a great organization that Berko and his team are doing with this conference. I really think it's a great location. Groningen is a beautiful city. Actually, I'm originally from the area, so it feels like coming home a bit when I'm here, so that's really lovely. What I want to talk about today is Learntail, not really about this tool, but more about the challenges that we encountered while developing it. I'll talk a bit more about that later. But I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm Dutch. I run a YouTube channel called ArjanCodes, where I want to help developers, development teams, basically write better code. Because I've noticed myself that while learning programming and while trying to do a better job at it, that this is becoming really important, and it makes such a big difference in the long term if you know how to do it well. So I do videos about Python, about software design, testing, architecture, some personal development as well. And if you like that kind of thing, but maybe you don't like to see my face or hear my voice, I have something new. I don't know if anybody already experimented with this. OpenAI, they introduced GPTs. Did anybody already try building one? Yeah, a few people? Okay, cool. So I actually created, I don't know if you can see that, I created an ArjanCodes GPT. So I infused it with my opinionated ideas about how you should write software, and then you can ask these questions about yeah, anything, basically. So let's say, can give an example of some clean Python code if it actually responds. Ah, there we go. So I'm not going to let you read all through all of these things, but basically I try to give it some basic knowledge of what I think could be good Python code, and then it gives you, you can use that to create some Python code.
Do you agree with it?
Well, it depends. This looks pretty good to me, right? There's type annotations, which I like. There's a main function, which is nice. Also, there's some deprecating Dutch humor, which is also nice, so perfect. I can just say these things and record a video, and then I have a YouTube video as well, so that's really good. Okay. So, what I want to talk about today is sort of the dark side of integrating large language models into your software. You know, we've seen, of course, how popular all these large language models are, and it seems like there's an infinite number of possibilities. But when you actually start using them and start to integrate them into your tools, you also run into a couple of issues and things that are just annoying challenges. And I want to go through some of these things today, some of the things that we've seen while we're developing a tool that uses an LLM. So that's a tool called Learntail. And what is this? This is basically a website where you can enter anything and it can create a quiz for you about that. And why did we build that? Well, actually the idea we had was like, okay, so people are watching YouTube videos, they're reading blog posts, and that's how a lot of people are learning nowadays. But it's also a really passive form of learning. You're just being a couch potato and absorbing information, basically. So we thought it might be nice to actually promote more active learning, which typically helps you retain knowledge better. And it's also helpful to, basically a tool to help content creators engage their audience a bit more. So you don't just publish content, but you actually invite people to be more actively involved in that. So that was our idea for this. And we used LangChain in this tool, so it uses a Python backend and a Next.js frontend. And then in the backend we used LangChain to basically connect our tool with the large language model. I don't know who has experience with LangChain. Okay, so a few people. I just want to show you how this actually works. So here's an example of, I don't know, is this readable? Yep. I can make this a bit larger, maybe. So how this actually works is that it's a Python package, LangChain. I think they also have a JavaScript version now that basically exposes the basic functionalities that you need in order to integrate with large language models. And then you can make this part of your backend API or any other application that you're developing. So, of course, you need an OpenAI API key. So I didn't put that in the code here, but this is what it uses. And then this is a very basic example where it's a simple chat tool that retrieves information about a country, just as a demo. So what you can do with LLMs, and especially if you integrate it in applications, it's useful if you can get the information back from the LLM in some sort of structured way, right? So you can do something with it. So what you can do with LangChain is that you can define a Pydantic model. Pydantic is a Python tool. For example, a country, and in this case, it has a capital, it has a name, and it has population. We have some settings, like which model do we use, what's the API key, and then we write a prompt. Very simple, in this example, just provide some information about a country. And then we want to get back, preferably, some sort of structured information so that we can do something with that. So we need to include some formatting instructions, because otherwise the LLM is just going to return, sure, here is some information about that country, which in your application you can't do that much with. So what I do in the code then is that there's some setup, so we set up the chat model, and then what I do is set up a parser that can convert basically the answer of the LLM into a format that adheres to this particular class that I defined here. And then the only thing we have to do when we send this prompt to the LLM is provide formatting instructions for this particular class. And what's really nice about LangChain is that it can generate this for you. So that's the method call that you see here, get format instructions. And basically, this part of the prompt is then replaced by those formatting instructions. And then finally, you get the output, you parse it, and then you have a country object that you can do something with. You can print the name, capital, population, whatever you want. So if I run this, then let's say any country, any tips for a country? I don't know. Okay, Friesland. Okay, we're in dangerous territory now. Okay, so it's actually pro-Frisian. That's nice. Yeah. But let's say you want to have some more control over, like, what it does if a country doesn't exist. You could just add that to the prompt here. So. I don't know, what's a nice fake capital name? Okay, so there we go. Let's try this again. Ah, error. That's actually a good thing. I hope this would happen, because that already points to some of the challenges that you're going to encounter when dealing with LLMs. Sometimes you don't get JSON back. Sometimes you do get JSON back, but the wrong field values. Sometimes it does something unpredictable. And GPT 3.5 is obviously a lot worse at this than GPT 4. So, for example, if I change this to GPT 4, there's actually a pretty big chance that it now works. Ooh, yes, okay, so it actually did this. And apparently there's over 100,000 cucumbers living there, which is quite a lot. Okay. So, challenges. I used, apparently, I learned this morning during Jonathan's presentation that we're supposed to use developer cats. So I added this last minute to the presentation. So now this example I just gave is a very simple example. Just get basic information from a LLM. If you build a tool that generates quizzes automatically, it's more complicated. Maybe before I go into the challenge, I should actually show what the tool is actually doing. That might also be helpful. So this is what it looks like. Very simple interface. You can basically, with this tool, you describe what you want the quiz to be about, and then it generates a quiz for you. So what do we want to do a quiz about? Punk rock. Okay. There we go. I have no idea, I have no knowledge of punk rock, so let's see. Anybody? Ramones? Yeah? Okay. Let's see if we can crowd solve this quiz. Okay. What city did the punk rock movement originate in? Oh, this is a hard one. Okay. London, okay. Yeah. Ah, ooh. Ooh, okay. Next. Well. Okay. I'm not even going to ask you. Who is this? Iggy Pop? Yeah? Okay. '77? Yeah? Ah. Oh, we did pretty well. 4 out of 5. Okay, so that's the idea. But you can do a few more things with this, like so you can type what you want a quiz to be about. But for example, I have here a video of on my YouTube channel, which is about data classes. So I can press the share button, I can copy the link, and then I can paste the link here, and then it's going to generate a quiz about this particular YouTube video. And this works for any YouTube video that has transcription, which most of them have nowadays, so that's pretty nice. And they also include a link to a quiz about it in the description. So now we have a data class quiz. So we won't do the full data class quiz, but you get the idea. And if you want to play around with this, it's free. You can just go to Learntail and check it out. So what were some of the challenges that we encountered when we tried to develop this tool? So one challenge that we saw is that basically when you send a prompt to an LLM, if you try to include too many different instructions, then actually it doesn't work. There seems to be some sort of limit to how far you can go with this. And then if you try to go beyond that limit, basically it starts to forget part of the instructions. It simply doesn't do it correctly. And this is something we haven't really solved now. I think this is a temporary problem, because if you look at the new GPT Turbo model, GPT-4 Turbo model, this has 128K tokens, so lots of tokens, and will probably also be able to take in more context. So I don't expect this to be an issue in the future, but this is definitely something that we noticed, so that sometimes we had to choose what we wanted to pass along to the LLM. Another challenge that we found is that you almost tend to forget that an LLM is not a human being. And because an LLM is not a human being, it means that there are some things that are hard to understand for large language models. For example, we wanted to add a setting to our quiz generation tool where you could indicate, like, hey, is this an easy, medium, or hard quiz? But simply telling the LLM create a medium level quiz or create a hard quiz doesn't work, because an LLM has no idea what that actually means. So we actually got the best results by, instead of just passing along that information, by translating it into something more tangible, or by going back to, let's say, the first principle. So what is it that makes a quiz hard? So instead of telling the LLM, create a hard quiz, we tell the LLM, create a quiz using expert jargon. Or make sure that at least 2 of the answers have approximately the same character lengths are very similar, but one is wrong. So you have to give it more specific instructions for it to really work. And even then, sometimes that's hard, because it doesn't have, let's say, the introspection to reason about its own output. So this is one challenge that we were facing, and that made it quite hard to come up with the right prompts, actually. So if you're communicating with an LLM, think of how you can make things more tangible and remove that human element from the interaction, sort of. Another challenge we had was that, of course, an LLM learns from data that's on the internet. And there's lots of bad practices on the internet. For example, one of the things we found is that a pretty common issue in the quizzes that our tool is generating is that typically the longest answer is the correct one. And that's because it has learned from quizzes online that typically in quizzes, well, the people making those quizzes don't really pay a lot of attention, and then typically the longest answer is the correct one. But that's of course not what you want, because then the quiz is way too simple. So also there, you have to make sure to provide tangible instructions to the LLM, like make sure that options have the same number of characters. And it doesn't always work. We found with newer models like GPT-4, this works better than with GPT 3.5. But still, it still doesn't consistently do it, even GPT-4. Another challenge that we run into, I think that most people run into when they integrate LLMs, is that there are token limits. Now, again, GPT-4 Turbo is going to have 128K tokens, so that's really quite a lot. But still, especially if you want to save some costs, if you have like very large prompts, that's really challenging because there are these token limits. And you have techniques like chunking, for example. You can cut a prompt into several parts and then basically ask what you need in several steps, smaller steps, which is quite a common workaround, or doing these requests then concurrently, for example. But that's also not ideal because you will lose maybe part of the context. You may get duplicate answers because the AI responds with the same thing for the two prompt segments. And another thing is that it's pretty hard to predict where you are with respect to these limits, because the token limit is input plus output. And of course, you don't know how many tokens the AI is going to generate. So you have to sort of guess, like, okay, I know this is the total limit, so I have to send this many tokens maximum, and then hopefully the AI doesn't become like very chatty and the system breaks down. So this is difficult to get right. And when you do that, chunking, calling things concurrently, it means you also more quickly run into rate limits. There may be a quota on the number of requests you can send per day, or a per minute limit on how many you can do, or how many tokens you can process per minute. Depends a bit on the model that you're using. And taking all of these things into account is pretty hard also. So you have to build these kinds of things into your code as well. So that's another thing that we found really hard to actually get right. And the final thing I want to mention, and this is something that, we haven't really solved yet, so I'm curious to hear from you. Maybe you have an idea on how to do it better, is that we're thinking about testing. So if you send a message to an LM and you can give it instructions, you get back a result, but how do you actually know that what you get back is what you want? There's no easy way to do that. If you get just JSON data back, well, you can check that. You can add some checks, but how do you test that one prompt is better than another prompt? The only way to really do it is to try it and send it to the AI and see what you get back. And then let's say you get back a bad result, so you make a tweak to the prompt, or you make multiple tweaks, and then you try that, and then suddenly it's better. But is that just coincidence? Or did you actually do something better that you can also apply to other prompts? I've no idea how to do that. Maybe we can use LLMs to do prompt testing. Could you ask an LLM to generate variations of a prompt and then run that through the LLM and check which variation does best? I don't know. So this is something we're really struggling with at the moment. And final thing that's related to this is that we had to really understand for ourselves that an LLM is not an API, and it behaves very differently from an API. So one thing is you might not always get valid JSON data back, right? Sometimes because of a token limit, you get back half a JSON object. So you need to check for syntax errors. You need to check for structural issues. Maybe there is a missing field, for example. Or you need to check for type issues where the value is not of the type that you want it to be, those things. And it also means that because of that, because of the rate limits and all the token limits, you need a lot more boilerplate code in your application to ensure that it's actually robust. So you need a mechanism to retry if there's no response. Because of the popularity of these models, often it either takes long or doesn't respond at all. You need to make sure you comply with the rate limits. You may have to do things like multi-shot prompts, concurrent requests to make sure you actually get an answer successfully. Maybe you need to implement a mechanism where if one model doesn't give the response that you want, that you fall back to an older model, and maybe that works, and do that automatically. And finally, don't forget that you can actually still write code yourself. I think it's one of the things that I'm a bit concerned about, that I get sometimes the impression that people then think, okay, let's just send it to an LLM to do the work for us, and maybe that's fine for some tasks, but there's also still a lot of things that we can just do by simply writing a simple function in Python, right? You don't need to send something to an LLM to compute the length of a list, for example. So I'm curious to see how that is going to work out in the coming years. Will we see that developers are going to rely too much on LLMs instead of doing the basic work themselves, which in the end leads to much faster and more climate-friendly solution as well? So that's what I'm curious about. So I'm also curious to hear your thoughts about that. So I'm going to end again with a nice cat image. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Arjan, for this great talk. Does anyone have a question? I think there's still time for a few questions.
Thanks. So in your quiz, you didn't have more than 5 questions. Is it because it started to get problems, like after the 10th one or something like that?
Okay, so you're asking whether the fact that the quiz has 5 questions has something to do with token limits or other kind of limitations.
Yeah.
Yeah, so not really. I mean, of course, if you ask an LLM to generate a quiz of 10,000 questions, you are going to run into token limits and probably also duplicate questions. We do have a setting in the app where you can change the number of questions. So I kept it here to 5, also to not spend too much time during my talk doing quizzes. But of course, yeah, I mean, if you create larger quizzes, then token limits are going to play a role. Yeah.
And you did try that?
Yes, yeah, it can generate 10 or 20 questions. That works. It's really a token limit question, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
One final question there.
Yeah, so you talked about evaluation and that being a problem, and you said maybe we should have the LLMs evaluate the LLMs. And the next slide you said, well, we shouldn't forget how to code. So I was wondering, we shouldn't forget to evaluate using evaluation sets. So do you think like evaluation sets are still necessary or still good? Or do you think like we're going to letting models be evaluated by models?
Okay, so are we going to get models being only fully evaluated by modules, or do we still need to write ourselves unit tests and things like this? I think at least for the time being, we should do both. I think there are some things that are pretty easy to write tests for, like checking that a JSON format is valid, for example, or checking that a certain that your chunking algorithm works correctly.
But I mean more in the sense of like, you know, for example, these large language models, they're also evaluated on, say, question answering tasks and things like that. So someone physically sits there and, you know, annotates questions and the answers and, you know, this is the correct answer. You could, of course, do the same, try to make an evaluation set, say, for quiz generation. And I wonder if you still believe there's a role for like someone spending a few hundred hours creating an evaluation set like that.
I think it's a cost-benefit analysis that you need to do, because it's expensive to have somebody sit hundreds of hours doing quizzes and manually checking that it's correct. I think you still need some human involvement on some level for sure, but I hope that we'll see newer testing techniques that we'll be able to use to automate that more, and not just LLMs or writing unit tests, also things like property-based testing, right, to generate data and or fuzzy testing mechanisms. So I think that's a gray area where we're going to see a lot of progress in the coming years.
We give one last big hand to Arjan. Since, and of course, the famous eye present for you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.